I think that a lot of the artists that are working today have not kind of held up to what I consider to be their end of the deal. You know, there's not nearly enough political art happening in a time when it really is needed. People are really shying away from it. And you know, I've gone to a lot of gallery shows and I've seen a lot of things, and I see a lot of street art, and it does not have a strong political message to it. You know, when you look back on, you know, well, I mean, especially the 60s, but you know, even things prior to that, you know, the 20s, the 30s, you know, people were voicing their concerns about where their society was, where they were headed.
Welcome to EIDOS the podcast, where we explore the ways in which ideas take their shape and form through the arts. This podcast is brought to you by EIDOSartworks.com, a website dedicated to bringing thought-provoking content that engages and inspires, and Spokane Falls Community College Photography and Digital Media Production programs, preparing students for careers in applied visual arts since 1965, and the Richmond Art Collective, supporting artists in downtown Spokane with affordable studio spaces and a gallery located in the historic Richmond Hotel building. My name's Ira Gardner, and I teach photography and digital media production at Spokane Falls Community College. I also have a studio here at the Richmond Art Collective, and I'm your podcast host. So let's get started. In this episode, we're going to meet Los Angeles-based mixed media artist W.B. Fontenot. His large murals and spoken word art offer sharp criticisms of popular culture and technology. He has a unique insider's perspective since he has worked as a fashion and glamour photographer for over 10 years, including getting his start at Playboy Studios. His book Muse, A Portrait of Sarah Jean Underwood, was just released as a 3rd edition printing. And he recently completed a series of murals that are part of a collection titled A Dangerous Excess of Human Knowledge. In part 1, we explore some of his early work and influences that have led him down the path of his current artwork.
And so drowns the promiscuous dreams of a country wrought with fevered emotion and broken hope, who hold hand over chest, not in a pledge, but to guard one's heart from the throes of injustice and the burden of grief and disappointment, whose dreams of grandeur no longer sparkle in the capitalist eyes of a besieged nation of consumers and oppressed ideologists, with single tears of regret forming a river of refusal ending in an ocean of foreseeable irony and inevitability, whose propaganda machine skipped like an old record and broke awareness to young and old. I think anybody who ever has met me knows that I'm a pretty sexually charged person. I never viewed Playboy as pornography. The idea of the human form photographed beautifully and the human form photographed explicitly are two totally different things in my mind. There's a lot of sexual energy around me, I suppose, and so to have that bleed into my work is kind of only a natural thing. I think a lot of the sexuality that appears in my imagery is me, or at least, you know, a part of me. My name is W.B. Fontenot. I'm a Los Angeles-based artist, and I also work out of a cabin up in Los Padres National Forest. I'm a multimedia artist, but I started in photography, and that photography is kind of molded into my multimedia work. My multimedia work started with a series called Phantasmagoria, which is kind of collage-y. I was mixing some of my own photography with stock images, and then that kind of changed in itself into Dangerous Excess of Human Knowledge, which is a little bit more politically charged, has a little bit more of a social message to it, and then I started actually shooting the majority of things in the pieces instead of using any stock imagery. My series Phantasmagoria came about because I was pretty ill for a little while. I was in and out of the hospital, and when I was released from the hospital, after going in 2 or 3 different times, I wouldn't necessarily say I was on bed rest, but I definitely couldn't do a whole lot. So what I did was I took that time to kind of reflect on things and where I was at that moment in time. I'd had kind of a rough go of it for a couple of months, obviously, and I started taking old photos that I had, and I jumped online, started grabbing free stock imagery and mixing it with those photos to create new images. And that was kind of one of my first major departures from what I had done prior to that. You know, a lot of my imagery, I guess, kind of stems from, some people would call it muse or inner self, dreams. It's things that flash to me. A Dangerous Excess of Human Knowledge, to get off of Phantasmagoria just briefly, and then I'll go back to it. That was actually the whole thing I saw in a world that I could actually walk through and was tangible to me. So creating the images that were there were very easy for me. It was just like painting and creating what was real. Phantasmagoria, in a sense, was similar to that, but it was more, instead of creating things that I actually saw, it was creating feelings that I had. And so I was taking these characters that were, I guess, symbolic of certain emotions or feelings or moments that I was having at that point in my life, and I was in turn making those tangible so they could be realized by me and released. You know, when I started shooting, I think I was around 19 or 20, and that's when I really picked up a camera. And when I began, I was much more into landscape and architecture, and not so much into the human form or people. And that started to change when I went to school. I think that the draw for me was, you know, my brother was an art history major, and he kind of drew me into the Renaissance and all of the art of the Renaissance. So, you know, I guess all the classic guys, Michelangelo, Donatello, and the sculpture of the human frame and the human body really intrigued me. It also intrigued me how they created it, and you know, kind of with all of its flaws and its curves. Well, and then I guess I don't even know if I could call it a flaw, because you know, I mean, the human body is the human body. So calling this something a flaw in a design might not make that much sense. I guess maybe it would be better to say something that's not your kind of atypical or stereotypical representation of it in modern media. I should say maybe it's more of society's idea of a flaw and not my own idea of a flaw, because I don't see it as, I don't see, you know, slight excessive weight or stretch marks or growths or, you know, moles or any of that as flaws. That's reality. In today's world, where you have everything so digitized and photoshopped, that all of that kind of literally gets brushed over and removed. I never actually set out a goal just to work at Playboy. When my wife and I, we got married and we moved to Los Angeles. Actually, we moved to Santa Barbara, and I was going to attend Brooks. Right away, I started to apply for different internships in the Los Angeles area, and I didn't hear back from any of them. So, you know, I kind of kept hounding them and calling different internships, and I read an article in American Photo about Playboy taking interns from Brooks, and that one of the photographers that was there, Arnie Freitag, he had, you know, graduated with a Brooks degree, and that had moved him into working at Playboy. So I thought, well, being that I'm attending Brooks right now, maybe that's kind of an end. So I started calling Playboy Studio West, and I just got the number on, I think I got it online from one of their contributing photographers, and they were one of the first people to actually respond to me and get back to me. And I went in, started an internship there, interned there for a couple of months, and then started assisting, not very regularly either, and then slowly worked my way in and ended up over the years running one of the crews.
We'll come back to this interview with W.B. Fontenot in just a moment. I think at this point it's relevant to share some imagery of Marcel Duchamp and Larry Sultan and Rene Magritte, because I think you see some of those influences in the work that we're about to see. Duchamp is perhaps most well known for producing works of art known as ready-mades that looked at mass-produced everyday objects and took them out of context to get us to think about what we were becoming as a society. Larry Sultan is another California photographer who passed away recently, and his work blended a combination of social documentary and tableau stage photography. Larry Sultan's perhaps most well known for his book The Valley, which came out in 2004, that takes place photographing tract homes in suburbia that were also the sets for the adult film industry. He was looking at the line between fantasy and reality in our everyday lives. Finally, I think the work that reminds me the most of W.B. Fontenot's most recent work is the artist Rene Magritte. And like all surrealists, he was known for challenging our perceptions of reality, and I think that's a lot about what we're going to see coming in this next segment that looks at W.B. Fontenot's current work, A Dangerous Excess of Human Knowledge.
I think that my work and the maybe not condemnation of media, but the targeting of different aspects of it and how it has kind of taken over portions of our lives has become stronger in my work as I've kind of learned more about the effects of it. This scenario in a world that's painted on television of Holly and, you know, at the time she was on The Girls Next Door. So with her two friends, you know, Kendra and Bridget, and this kind of light, fluffy, nothing wrong ever happens world that they live in, where everything is kind of taken care of for them, and, you know, their biggest concerns are what they're going to be wearing to, you know, parties, and it was the way that it was presented to the world. And this was an image of kind of a confrontation of something horrific. And you can see her even with this like huge beautiful watch and this, you know, gorgeous swimsuit running out of the swimming pool with the other girl in the background who's the pool cleaner smoking a cigarette, kind of not really paying attention to anything except, you know, getting sun. So you have all these businessmen kind of falling. That image is called the high, the middle, the low, and if you look at the type that's on the image, the word middle is faded, so it's a little bit more opaque than the other two, and it's about the vanishing of the middle class. the idea of the woman with the TV is the kind of stereotypical beautiful housewife, kind of hiding from it and being pulled down with it while watching the entire endeavor. Now, the reason why she is topless is because there's a vulnerability to nudity, and that's what I'm trying to get across with that. I think that I show and reflect the vulnerability of people a lot of times through either tattered clothing, which you see a lot in the businessmen. Especially, there's a piece that I did in one of my first shows called The Misfits of Room 210. That was the title of the show. And the piece was called Industry's Wife. And it's shot on a blue set. And there is a man who's reading a newspaper in a tattered, kind of destroyed suit, and a beautiful woman sitting next to him, completely nude, kind of covering herself, and she's looking at the frame, and he's kind of inundated with this this newspaper. I think it's actually a copy of the Wall Street Journal. The point of it is that he's so drawn into his work and the kind of drive of what society deems he should be into, that everything that he's owned, his suit, the set that he's in, you can see the walls are in disarray, the windows are falling. All of these things have kind of gone to shit. And this beautiful wife that is sitting next to him, completely naked, trying to get any ounce of his attention, is being completely ignored. And so there is that vulnerability in her there, and that she's completely uncovered to all things, and she's exposed herself, I guess we could say, not just physically but emotionally to him, and had little to no reaction. I started with photography, and I really liked, I still love the medium of photography, but it was not allowing me to achieve the ability to actually really put forth the message that I wanted to put forth. There was also a lack of texture in it, and a lack of kind of three-dimensionality. It wasn't 3D, and I wanted something that was a lot more tangible. And it was also the idea of creating things that were one of a kind instead of something that could easily be reproduced. So I started playing with it probably in 2006. I actually picked up acrylics and started painting, and then that kind of morphed and changed, and I started adding things to it. The first thing I started adding to paintings was just Polaroids, and then I would take acrylics and paint over them, and then I started doing some stenciling and using tape to tape off different areas, and that just kind of, I guess, mutated and changed into what it is now.
I'd sell your heart to the junk man, baby, for a buck. For a buck. If you're looking for someone to pull you out of that ditch, you're out of luck. You're out of luck. Ship is sinking. The ship is sinking. The ship is sinking. There's a leak in the boiler room. The poor, the lame, the blind. Who are the ones that we kept in charge? Killers, thieves, and warriors. God's away, God's away, God's away on business, business. God's away, God's away, God's away on business, business.
My newer work consists of vellum paper that I print my photographs and kind of the digital composited images on. And then those are adhered to the canvas, usually with a wheat paste, which most street artists use to, put up street art posters and whatnot. And then the whole thing is kind of gone over with a polymer medium. My newest work, I'm using a lot of shellacs and different tinting to kind of give it a different hue and a different look to it and a different glow. Being able to kind of expand past just the medium of photography and having prints run. Being able to take composited images and have a filler of paint in between those to create, I guess kind of much grander imagery has not only allowed me to go bigger, but it's also allowed me to create what I actually see in my mind, where there were, and a lot of times it was a cost effectiveness thing, but I was unable to achieve those things just with straight photography. Yeah, I started revisiting some old novels that I hadn't read in a long time. I started with Animal Farm, and then worked my way, kind of the Orwell thing, and went straight into 1984. And I'm a huge dystopia fan. So anything that's dystopia related, and that can consist of everything from Blade Runner to RoboCop to Battlestar Galactica. I just read The Man in the High Castle. Anything that's kind of this different take on our world and how it could end up, or pointing out, I guess, flaws through fiction, I find very intriguing. So after 1984, I was looking for something else, and I had never read Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. So I picked it up and read through it, and that's when, what I was just talking about, this kind of tangible world that I could walk through. It's when I started seeing all of this whenever I would close my eyes, and I saw it as a complete show. I saw it as like 37 different pieces. So the idea behind it, and I think a lot of the, I guess the engine and the locomotive is these dystopias, and how we as a society, especially if you go the 1984 route through it, have become our own big brother, and kind of giving away all of this information that there's this fear of Orwell's, of these telescreens kind of looking down on us. We're doing with smartphones, and it's not even being forced upon us. We're doing it freely. I guess the only optimistic piece, which is the girl with the long, colorful skirt, and it's we are what we've been waiting for. It's the idea that we are the change that we want. We just kind of haven't recognized that, and we haven't realized it yet. The rest of the pieces in the show are very pessimistic, and it's kind of this idea of us giving ourselves away and losing ourselves in technology. And then here there's this one piece that kind of brings it all back together. Even with all of this technology, we still hold on to these kind of ancient ideas and rituals, and it's silly to me that we are having such a difficult time evolving socially when technologically we are advancing very, very quickly. I suffer a lot from depression, quite a bit, and I think that art has been my saving grace in a lot of ways. I've had some pretty low points, and being able to dump that onto a canvas or into a print, and express that, or express something, has been a total saving grace for me. I would really like, anyone who goes and see my work. Let me start that over. When people walk away from the gallery exhibit, Dangerous Excess of Human Knowledge, I'd really like them to at least kind of think about what they're doing on a daily basis and their tie to what I consider to be one's digital self and not one's actual self, because I think that there's a definitive difference between the two. There's the digital self where, you know, you have all of these photos and, you know, you can definitely choose your persona to some degree, and then there's the reality. And I think that people have stepped more into their digital self and are more tied to that than a lot of times than they are to their real identity. So for somebody to even realize that that's a possibility, or that's something that's affecting them and their relationships, not only with family and friends, but with total strangers, I think it's at least important to start a dialogue on, and to just start thinking about and realizing, because I think it kind of goes unsaid a lot.
To wrap up this very special episode of EIDOS Artworks video podcast, we are now going to share with you in its entirety the spoken word poem and artwork by W.B. Fontenot entitled Curdle.
And so drowns the promiscuous dreams of a country wrought with fevered emotion and broken hope, who hold hand over chest, not in pledge, but to guard one's heart from the throes of injustice and the burden of grief and disappointment, whose dreams of grandeur no longer sparkle in the capitalist eyes of a besieged nation of consumers and oppressed ideologists, with single tears of regret forming a river of refusal, ending in an ocean of foreseeable irony and inevitability, whose propaganda machine skipped like an old record and broke awareness to young and old alike. Only through complacency in media was control re-established and utilized to rain favor for the puppet masters with Christmas cheer and economic pacification, whose inkwells overflow and spill progress onto networks with humor and ventriloquist acts given to debate with morally liquidated, God-fearing protagonists, throwing Marxism and socialism like candy-covered razors at a Dia de los Muertos parade to a multitude of open mouths, who take to streets with signs and bottled enthusiasm, raping their ideals and breaking bottles over frustration, creating monopolies of carelessness with loosely gathered consciousness of creed and non-theistic approval of oneness and inclusion, who tread water with sharks and porpoises alike, covering wounds as not to become chum, with sun-dried lips puckered for the ass that threw them overboard, watching horizon for Chinese boats and German flags that travel these horse latitudes, importing products of slavery in reciprocation of exported careers, who bestow citizenship upon corporations while restricting it from people, condemning fate with the word illegal, giving heed to impulse and fear, resurrecting the Poland and German ghettos and orchards and fields, missing only the patch of genetic guilt, who have confused abhorrence with altruism and hide in front of their hallowed oligarchy, metamorphosing into the facade of the two-party system for an audience under siege, who grapple with delusions and hallucinations of synthetic wealth and binary fame, while compromised by TV and inundated with the tsunami of consumeristic commercial mandate, brought to their knees by a bull and the Buttonwood Agreement, made strong by the forethought of madmen and executives who eat at the same trough and revel in their collaborative excrement, whose odious promises blow like a wind over coals, igniting intolerance and bigotry, sparking worry from discomfort and becoming self-propelled with the combustion of grievance, felicitously aligned with the oppressed in lieu of the oppressors, who get more airtime and larger podiums, who speak without pointing and trade integrity for billfolds, who fuck mistresses under the sanctity of marriage and tap untapped code in bathroom stalls, who diaper dysentery and place generic band-aids on punctured arteries, purging neglected afterbirth and unattended aspirations, built on backs of supporting idealists who wear I voted stickers and hand out pamphlets on one-way streets ending in too many necropolises, brimming with names chiseled on styrofoam tombstones. For when free speech takes the form of currency, the voices of the poor will have no echo in the halls of Congress, and chosen politicians will be carried to office on sound waves expelled by lobbyists procured to stifle the imminent advancement of revolution, who find criminal acts of grievance and enlightenment through occupation of achievable momentum and perseverance of concern instead of nostalgic remedies to modern enigma, who cry wolf at the sight of a small canine and panic with their inaptitude of pattern recognition and flaunt their shortcomings as leaders as a resurgence of the everyday man, who turn back to science and boast God-endorsed views that balk at the questions of authority and inhumane practices, treating Yahweh as commodity while breaking commandments behind flamboyant Decalogue displays. Forced to tiptoe on eggshells through corridors of whispers, we hear momentary lapses of godliness and scrutiny of motivation, and still, we charge no line. We keep the hard questions in burnt notebooks and archived emails as not to offend or entice individual thought, who suffer from forbearance and shy from confrontation at fine dining establishments and breakfast nooks alike, while masking self-mutilation in factory farm meats and bioengineered substance, feasting on microwavable defeat and rehydrated manifestations of fuel. Conversation is given to pop cultures and arenas, broken by the loud chewing of disgruntled mouths of perpetual disposers of homogenized advertisements, who carry smartphones which dull civil integrity and pass as institutionalized social hierarchy, promoted by applications created to ameliorate melancholy and divert individualism to a more controllable, subdued congregation of devotees, who suffer the shallow breath of withdrawal while stranded in dead zones, holding phone to the sky in prayer and appeasement, lost and alone, side by side, finding inclusion in socially acceptable exhibition of apathy and pathological lack of empathy, drawing on neglect of presence as social superiority, hidden in the preoccupation of a digital self, who clamor for direction as long as the path is beaten flat and does little to diverge from the road that they are already on, who distract with lottery daydreams and flag-toting RVs while reaching into the back pockets and picking locks on doors, taking education and art, leaving debt and ignorance in sock drawers across the nation, contaminating information with the help of politically sanitized language, creating guise by the reworking of factual and direct wording to corporate and government-approved optimism for easier conditioning of the quiescent, complacent majority, who fight over trivial pre-established agreements while a middle class dissolves into slums and heartbreak, while workers carry spoons to soup kitchens, all while branding 25% off a 55-inch LCD as freedom, who hide trials behind concrete and barbed wire, holding court at gunpoint while sodomizing Lady Justice and paving way for a new precedent set on events that hold the very ideas of America in contempt, who try to propel thought on diets of rationed cheese and stale crackers, indulging in refashioned history books and plagiarizing falsified information to authenticate their voice, bringing about a cataclysm built on distorted records, ending only in the reproduction of original script, which too will be adapted to bring backing to the elite, who mediate swells of influence and tides of privilege to keep at bay cries for due process by streets filled with the hollow voice of the common, devoted to the legacies of their fathers while hanging their offspring in effigy, filled with talking points created by men in small, smoke-filled rooms, and view humanity as barcodes and infantry, districts, and ballots, composting a rotting working class into fertilizer for the decadent flowers that bloom only with the greed-infused capitalism. With ever-expanding gardens, these cannibals of men have cut all the fat and now suck bone marrow. For when extravagance becomes regularity, essential needs become primitive, and thus follows dehumanization of the impoverished, who through brief moments of astuteness and illumination find solve for the world's dilemmas, yet through laziness and egotism neglect to write it down before they sleep, to dream instead of medals and prizes, gifts and nobilities, wanting only the conclusion of distinction without the journey of perseverance and the challenge of true selflessness, who sit on neighborhood councils and infect chamber of commerce to push private agendas and execute personal vendettas, halting forward motion and debilitating conversation, leading to an upward spiral of impasse, ceasing collaboration and compromise on every level, with juvenile and incessant steadfast becoming habitual and encouraged by procured individuals of similar mind and influence, cheering the bipartisan sludge that has condemned democracy, who inherited mulish attributions, believing only 3 + 1 can equal 4 while damning and denouncing all twos, barricading roads that should be widened, crusading against diversity, who educate generations to question only those they hold authority over, chained together as if paper dolls by IVs of complacency and subordination, bottle-fed information by foster parents of humanity, as if SIDS took the inner child, named rebellion, named individual, named self, and made void the eyes of each neoteric clone, who are generals in the army of a misquoted God, taking up arms against the philanthropy and forgiveness that they proclaim allegiance to, listing conditions as mandate for unconditional love, doting over the sanctity of life while they extolled primitive use of executions, corrupted by the ignorance and bias of man, both written and preached, who are wolves cloaked as shepherds, speaking in overused metaphors and simple-minded catchphrases, syndicating the edification of gospels of greed and narcissism, prayers of suppression and dominance to an assembly of sheep. Among them, a figure stands, back to the world in cowardice, fearful of losing a fictitious dream, years of sweat and sleepless nights, the carrot on the string. There, standing inert under a rain cloud which ponders expulsion while taunting wind chimes and playing peekaboo with shadows, waiting for another to step forward, hand on an umbrella which is all but metal skeleton, chewed by rats working under the shade of naivete. Dependent upon the diversion of the cloud, the rats take full belly to refuge in the walls of dismantled homes, assimilating under the flag of this new plague.